Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting and reading reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. C'est avec plaisir que je dépose le rapport d'étape 2011, progrès réalisés dans les services en français offerts par le gouvernement de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the Progress Report 2011, French Language Services provided by the Government of Nova Scotia.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je me lève en tant que ministre des Affaires acadiennes. Before I make my statement, Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce in the gallery a couple of distinguished guests attending for the tabling of this report and this ministerial statement. I'd like to draw to the attention of the House Mr. Jean Legere, Executive Director, Directeur Général of the Fédération Acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse, and also Monsieur Paul D'Entremont, Directeur Général, Réseau Santé Nouvelle-Écosse, the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Francophone Health Network, and I'd like to ask them to rise to receive the welcome of the House.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy today's proceedings. The Honourable Minister of Acadian Affairs.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est avec plaisir que je viens de déposer le rapport d'étape 2011, progrès réalisés dans les services en français offerts par le gouvernement de la Nouvelle-Écosse. The successes highlighted in the report make life better for Acadian and Francophone families and contribute to economic growth in our province. Nous reconnaissons bien sûr qu'il y a encore du chemin à faire. Célébrons les succès de 2010-2011 et misons sur ces accomplissements. Voici quelques exemples. Premièrement, 27 consultations et rencontres sur l'engagement des citoyens avec la communauté acadienne et francophone. Deuxième, la mise sur pied d'un service d'interprétation téléphonique pour offrir aux professionnels de la santé l'accès à des interprètes francophones qualifiés. Un troisième exemple, la collaboration avec les partenaires qui offrent des services d'éducation aux adultes pour promouvoir l'alphabétisation et les compétences essentielles dans la communauté acadienne et francophone. Quatrième, des lignes directrices ont été élaborées afin d'offrir un protocole uniforme pour intégrer la connaissance du français dans la planification et la gestion des ressources humaines. Mr. Speaker, our government, like other governments before us, continue to make excellent headway in developing and providing services in French to our Acadian and Francophone communities, but of course there's still work to do. There will always be more work to do. Je tiens à remercier tous les néo-écossais qui parlent français, ainsi que les organismes communautaires acadiens et francophones de la province qui demandent pour les services en français, qui les utilisent et qui participent aux consultations du gouvernement. Cela confirme que nous sommes sur la bonne voie. Monsieur le Président, c'est avec plaisir donc que je viens de déposer le rapport d'étape 2011 pour les services en français. And Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to have just tabled the Progress Report 2011 for French Language Services. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais remercier le Bureau du ministre responsable des Affaires acadiennes pour nous envoyer ces remarques en avance. Je crois que tous les membres de cette Assemblée, moi inclus, convenons que tous les services gouvernementaux doivent être disponibles à tous les Nouvelles-Écossais. Lorsque tout le monde peut accéder des services, accéder leur gouvernement et s'engager dans la croissance économique de cette province, tout le monde en avantage. Dans ses remarques brèves que nous avons reçues, le ministre décrit ce que son gouvernement a fait d'améliorer les services pour les Acadiens et les francophones. Bien que ce gouvernement a pris des mesures d'améliorer l'accès aux services, il reste du travail à faire. Comme le ministre a dit soi-même, il y a encore du chemin à faire. Tous les peuples en Nouvelle-Écosse doivent avoir le même accès aux services et doivent avoir accès aux services qui sont d'une aussi bonne qualité offerts à tous les Nouvelles-Écossais. Tout le monde doit avoir les mêmes opportunités, quelle que soit leur langue. Il est essentiel d'inclure les membres des communautés acadiennes et francophones quand on parle des services qui vont affecter leur communauté. J'aimerais féliciter ce ministre et ses consultations et l'encourage de les continuer et les élargir lorsque nous discutons comment faire plus de services disponibles en français. Le caucus libéral a hâte de voir le rapport d'étape en entier et encourage ce gouvernement à continuer et élargir ses efforts en améliorant l'accès aux services et les programmes en français pour tous les Nouvelles-Écossais. Merci. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Office of the Minister of Acadian Affairs for sending the ministerial statement in advance. I think all members of the legislature, myself included, agree that all government services should be made available to all Nova Scotians. Everyone sees a benefit when people can access services, access their government, and participate in the province's economic growth. Even though the government has taken steps to improve access to services, there's still work to do. As the minister said, we have a way to go. We still have a way to go. All people in Nova Scotia must have the same access to services and must have access to the same high quality of service offered to all Nova Scotians. Everyone should have the same opportunities no matter which language they speak. It is critical to include members of the Acadian and Francophone communities when we talk about services that will directly affect those communities. I'd like to commend the Minister on the consultations and encourage the Minister to continue and expand the consultation as we discuss how we can make more services available in French. The Liberal caucus looks forward to seeing the report and encourages this government to continue to expand its efforts in improving access to services in French and for all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci au ministre de fournir sa déclaration à l'avance. Au nom de Christian Tremont, le porte-parole PC en affaires acadiens, je vais répondre. Bien que les services en langue française en Nouvelle-Écosse ont été considérablement accrus jusqu'à présent, il y a beaucoup à faire. Nous attendons une nouvelle entente avec le gouvernement fédéral. Quand sera-t-elle finalisée? Et quelque chose que nous préconisons depuis maintenant un certain temps, à savoir quand des services de traduction seront disponibles à l'Assemblée législative. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I will now recognize the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I request that the House revert back to tabling reports, regulations, and other papers.
The motion has been to revert back to tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table the submissions to the first contract discussion paper posted recently on the Department of Labour and Advanced Education, and as well I will table the mandate and membership of the Labour Management Review Committee and the Labour Board. Thank you.
The papers are tabled. Government notices of motion. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas New Brunswick native Steve Murphy has been involved in broadcasting for most of his adult life, taking his first job with a local radio station while he was still in high school. And whereas Steve moved to Nova Scotia more than 25 years ago to work with CJCH Radio in Halifax and later with CTV Atlantic, where he remains the station's longest-serving anchor and arguably the most well-known television journalist in the Atlantic region. And whereas this veteran interviewer has years of experience discussing the issues most important to Atlantic Canadians with those intimately involved in the news, people like myself who have appeared countless times on air with Steve. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the legislature congratulate Steve Murphy on his illustrious career in journalism, including 25 years with CTV Atlantic. Wish him many more years of success in front of the television cameras. Mr. Speaker, I would request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Halifax Regional School Board Superintendent Carol Olson challenged students at the official opening ceremony for Waverley Memorial Elementary School in May to imagine what their new school should be, and whereas students from Mrs. Latimer's 2010-2011 grade 5 class created artwork to show us that their new school should be a place where everybody is included, where you can be as creative as you can be, and where you can reach the highest for your education. And whereas Miss Olson was inspired by the students' vision for the school and had the artwork made into a booklet. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly recognize the students at Waverley Memorial Elementary School for rising to the challenge and creatively sharing their ideas of what their school should be. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cumberland Public Libraries have joined the e-reading craze and is bringing along the residents in that area with them. And whereas readers have been able to download books to their own personal electronic readers from the province's public libraries for almost 3 years, and in that time the use of these devices have increased significantly. And whereas although borrowing or downloading books is free, the devices are not. Realizing this, the Cumberland Public Libraries is lending e-readers that come preloaded with best-selling and new titles in a variety of genres. Therefore, be it resolved that this House join me in congratulating the Cumberland Public Libraries for providing Nova Scotians access to education and lifelong learning, thereby making life better for families in this region. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Thomas Grotrian, a famous musician and more recently the marketing manager for the Royal Nova Scotia International Tattoo, died earlier this year in a tragic accident at a friend's home. And whereas Mr. Grotrian was one of 2 bagpipers behind a string of record-breaking piping parades in Glasgow, Scotland, who later took the concept of mass parades overseas to places like New York, Paris, Shanghai, and Rome. And whereas a memorial service will be held in Halifax tomorrow, November 24th, to celebrate Mr. Grotrian's life and his significant contributions to the tattoo, the world's largest annual indoor show. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House recognize the tremendous accomplishments of Thomas Grotrian and send our deepest sympathies to his family and friends on the loss of this great man. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to make an introduction before I table my bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the East Gallery, I would ask the following individuals to stand when I call their name. Carrie Fraser, Program Officer with the Department of Health and Wellness Environmental Health Division. Gary O'Toole, who is the Director of Environmental Health for Health and Wellness. And Dwayne, I'm having a senior's moment, so I can't remember your last name. But Dwayne, who is a social worker and has been seconded to the department. And in addition, Mr. Steve Sutherland, a retired local body art artist. And Mr. Speaker, these individuals have taken part in a bill briefing earlier this afternoon and are an important part of moving this legislation forward, and I'd like members of the House to give them a warm welcome, please.
We welcome all our visitors to the gallery and hope that they enjoy today's proceedings. I'll now recognize the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Regulate Body Art Facilities.
The Honourable Minister for Health and Wellness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Regulate Body Art Facilities.
Bill number 109, an act to regulate body art facilities.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do this in my capacity as Minister for Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Well, very good.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act.
The Honourable Minister for Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Residential Tenancy Act.
Bill number 110, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ridgecliff Middle School in Beachville won the Custodian Team of the Year Award presented in October of 2011, whereas this award was presented by Scotia Learning Centre to Joey Higgins, Tom Marriott, and Lenny Mitchell, whereas this award is given to a team of custodians who are proactive in the workplace by going beyond the standard job requirements and expectations. Therefore, be it resolved, the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Joe Higgins, Tom Marriott, and Lenny Mitchell on a top-notch job that they are doing, keeping every square inch of Ridgecliff Middle School in Beachville as clean as possible. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 17, 2011, at the Chester Area Middle School, the Chester Relay for Life took place. And whereas this year the teams raised over $42,000. Whereas together we celebrate, remember, and fight back against cancer. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates and thanks all volunteers who helped plan the 2011 Chester Relay for Life, as well as everyone that participated. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Carlos Beals, at the age of 14, started volunteering at the Dartmouth North Community Centre, started getting good grades and challenging his mind with tougher classes, even against the advice of guidance counselors. And whereas several years later, 20-year-old Carlos is an excellent example of what youth can do when they put their minds to it, and is now entering his third year of a 4-year criminal justice program at Humber College. And whereas Carlos says his goal is to work for the Halifax Regional Police, and in particular in the community of Dartmouth North, where he thinks he can help bridge the gap between the community and police. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly acknowledge Carlos Beals for continuing to make positive choices and for his continued desire to give back to his community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Hydrostone District Business Association, or HDBA, was created in 2011 to promote the businesses in the historic Hydrostone area of North End Halifax. And whereas the HDBA organized a Christmas tree lighting ceremony and celebration which filled the Hydrostone Park to overflowing with happy families and their excited children on the evening of Friday, November 18th. And whereas representatives from the municipal and provincial levels of government, along with the many spectators, enjoyed the festivities, which included singing by students from the Shambhala School and which culminated with the lighting of the Christmas tree in the center of Hydrostone Park. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Hydrostone District Business Association, its members, and the many volunteers who helped on a very successful Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Hydrostone Park, which is certainly to be followed by many more happy occasions in years to come. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the staff of the Legislative Library go above and beyond with their duties on a daily basis, and whereas Information Services Librarian Heather Ledlow has been working with the Nova Scotia House of Assembly Legislative Library since 2006, and whereas today is Heather's birthday. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly thank the staff of the Legislative Library for their hard work, and all members wish Heather a very happy birthday. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas, since 2005, the United Church of Canada has rung the bells at the Covenanter Church in Grand Pré at exactly 5:55 p.m. to pay tribute to the thousands of Acadians deported in 1755. And whereas an inner spiritual and intercultural service was held at the Covenanter Church in Grand Pré at 5:55, followed by a walk of solidarity to the National Historic Site on July 28, 2011. And whereas, inspired by this idea, the Société Nationale de l'Acadie decided to spread the tradition to Acadian communities throughout the Maritimes. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the efforts of the United Church of Canada for providing an opportunity to remember the past for the members of our Acadian communities throughout the Maritimes. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cora Beck was named Employee of the Year at the Shelburne County Business Development Corporation and the Shelburne and Area Chamber of Commerce 2011 Business Excellency Awards on October the 20th, 2011. And whereas Cora Beck, who has been employed at Charlotte Lane Cafe in Shelburne for the past 15 years, excels when it comes to customer service, ensuring each customer experience a continuing enhanced by her infectious smile, welcoming attitude, and informed guidance. And whereas Cora Beck is truly an asset to the employer and her second family, the Charlotte Lane Cafe, taking great pride in her work ethics and performance. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Cora Beck for being named Employee of the Year of the Shelburne County Business Development Corporation and Shelburne and Area Chamber of Commerce 2011 Business Excellency Awards on October the 20th, 2011. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sackville Kinsmen have generously supported the construction of the Murdoch McKay Memorial Kinsman Park at First Lake, and whereas the Sackville Kinsmen support the community through many fundraising events, and whereas the Kinsman Club of Sackville reached 50 years of service to Sackville and surrounding communities and held a celebration in April of 2011, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly thank the Kinsman Club of Sackville for their generosity and the 50 years of service to Sackville and surrounding communities, and wish them many more years of success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Constable Megan Apostolaris of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, formerly of West River Station, Pictou County, is a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Musical Ride, who performed throughout the Maritimes this past summer. Stephen. And whereas Constable Apostolaris, with her horse named Walsh, and her fellow riders of the musical ride performed their world-famous show at the Hector Arena in Pictou in front of family and friends and fans. And whereas Constable Apostolaris and her fellow riders of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police musical ride performed 2 sold-out shows and donated the proceeds to the Father Gerald Mackenzie Council of the Knights of Columbus, who will use the funds for local projects. Therefore, it be resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislative Assembly thanks Constable Apostolaris and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Musical Ride for bringing their world-famous show and horses to Pictou County as part of their 2011 Atlantic Tour. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you. Birthday girl. This is on behalf of my colleague, the MLA for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island. I'll sit back down. No. What are you going to do? I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the AIDS Coalition of Nova Scotia is a not-for-profit organization which empowers and supports those living with and affected with HIV/AIDS, as well as those at risk. And whereas the AIDS Coalition of Nova Scotia is a leading sponsor of the 2011 World AIDS Day Vigil, which pays respect to those who've been lost to HIV/AIDS while uniting our community in hope for a cure. And whereas on December 1st, 2011, the World AIDS Day Vigil will take place at the Halifax Marriott waterfront, with attendees encouraged to bring a non-perishable food donation for Manna for Health. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the AIDS Coalition of Nova Scotia for its commitment to advocacy, education, and compassionate support on World AIDS Day and throughout the year. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you. Act 2, Mr. Speaker. This is for myself, for Truro Bible Hill. Thank you. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
A little more vigor.
Whereas Sergeant Stephen Glode of the Millbrook First Nation first joined the RCMP as a general duty officer in 1992 and has served in various detachments throughout Nova Scotia during the last 19 years. And whereas Sergeant Glode has served as an Aboriginal policy analyst with the RCMP, served as a commander of the Indian Brook Detachment for the past 4 years, was invested in the Order of Merit of Police Forces in 2005 due to his personal and professional dedication to the RCMP and First Nations people. And whereas Sergeant Stephen Glode has recently been commissioned as an inspector with the RCMP, making him the first Mi'kmaq person to be commissioned as an officer. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Sergeant Stephen Glode on being the first Mi'kmaq to be commissioned as an RCMP officer and wishes him well as he continues in his career. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and on behalf of my colleague, the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Eastern Passage resident Rose Dalling has been involved with volunteer committee work through the Lions Club for many years. And whereas in the spring of 2011, Rose received the Lions Foundation of Canada Life membership from the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Lions Club at the 39th Charter Night. And whereas Rose volunteers on numerous committees in the club, such as Bar, Bingo, Carnival, Children's Christmas Party, and Charter Night, while chairing several committees including Stamps, Eye, Glasses, and Pins. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly commends Rose Dalling of Eastern Passage for being the recipient of the Lions Foundation of Canada Life membership from the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Lions Club. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas writing is a powerful tool, holding the potential to reflect and express important personal memories and experiences. And whereas the opportunity for members of a community to come together to explore ideas that are important to them and to learn how to share these ideas with others is an important aspect of cultural growth. Whereas And whereas Carol Langell, South Shore Library's writer-in-residence, is offering writing workshops, critiques, and advice at the Thomas Riddall Library in Liverpool to encourage the growth of our cultural community. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates Carol Langell for bringing members of the community together in setting conducive to cultural growth. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Midget B Hockey Tournament was held in March of this year in Canso, where the Westville Miners went undefeated through 5 games to win the championship. And whereas in the final game, the Western Miners and Eastern Shore Mariners competed for the win. With 5 minutes left in the 3rd period, the Miners broke the 2-2 tie, claiming the 2011 championship. And whereas the Westville Miners brought home the gold medal and dominated by taking 3 of the 6 positions on the All-Star team. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate the Westville Midget B Miners, their coaches and volunteers, for being the 2011 champions, and the people of Canso, who hosted a top-notch tournament. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Antigonish native Mike Tobin is the shortstop for the New Glasgow Kinsmen Midgets, Nova Scotia's team at the Baseball Canada Championships held this past August, and whereas Mike Tobin was named the Major Male Player of the Year at Baseball Nova Scotia's annual general meeting and awards banquet held on October 29th, and whereas Mike Tobin is also an accomplished hockey and soccer player on the Dr. J.H. Gillis Regional Royals teams, whose goal is to play NCAA baseball at an American university. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Mike Tobin on being awarded Baseball Nova Scotia's Major Male Player of the Year award and wish him the best in his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas team sports play an integral role in enriching the lives of youth and adults in Cumberland North, and whereas the Pugwash Panthers boys soccer team used the strategy of keeping the ball on the ground, making smart passes, staying physical with their opponents, and playing harder than they've ever played before. And whereas the Pugwash Panthers won their 2nd Division 4 Boys Provincial Soccer Championship with a 3-1 win over École de Sommet of Halifax on November 5th, 2011.
Division 4.
Therefore, it be it resolved that this House of Assembly join me in congratulating the Pugwash Panthers boys soccer team for bringing home the gold medal in the Division 4 Provincial Soccer Championships for the 2nd time. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas members of the Greater Hammonds Plains Community Association have identified the Hammonds Plains roads as a hazard to their safety and their vehicles. And whereas they brought attention to this issue by holding a rally for lanes on June 25th, 2011, a nearly 11-kilometer march along the road. And whereas they brought the issue further into the public's eye by gathering more than 2,400 signatures on a petition for active transportation lanes and safety improvements. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly join me in commending members of the Greater Hammonds Plains Community Association for their work as coming together as a community and bringing important issues in their area to the forefront of public discussion. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NSSAF Western Region Cross Country Championships took place at the Municipal and Area Recreation Complex, known as MARC in Bridgewater, on October 17, 2011. And whereas the Kings County Academy, or KCA, junior girls team consisted of Megan Vaughn, Paige Chisholm, Jillian Cumby, Madeline Lawrence, Emily MacArthur, and Morgan Lutz. And whereas the KCA entry won the junior girls regional banner for the second straight year, advancing to the provincial championship held in Halifax on October 24th. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate the Kings County Academy Junior Girls Cross Country team on winning the NSSAF Western Regional Championships at the Mark in Bridgewater on October 17, 2011. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to read this resolution on behalf of my colleague Pam Birds, the MLA for Lunenburg. Excuse me.
Very good.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Felton South resident Sheila Woodcock is the founder and president of QSE Consulting, Inc., a firm that fills a niche market relating to quality standards in education for medical laboratories. And whereas the Progress Women of Excellence Awards from the Canadian Progress Club's Halifax Cornwallis chapter celebrate the achievements of women in 6 business sectors who have made a profound impact on the community. And whereas Sheila Woodcock has been selected as the winner of the Entrepreneur Innovator category for the 22nd Annual Awards and was recognized during a gala dinner on November 16, 2011, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Sheila Woodcock of Felton South on winning the Progress Women of Excellence Award in the category of Entrepreneur Innovator and recognizes her contributions to the local community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This resolution on behalf of my friend, the member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May the 11th, 2011, the Guysborough Memorial Hospital Auxiliary awarded 9 contributors with lifetime memberships, and whereas Agnes O'Connor was one of those who received a lifetime membership in the Guysborough Memorial Hospital Auxiliary on that occasion, and whereas Agnes O'Connor's lifetime membership was awarded by the Auxiliary to honour the range of her valuable contributions, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly acknowledge Agnes O'Connor for her valuable contribution to the Guysborough Memorial Hospital and its Auxiliary and congratulate her on receiving her lifetime membership in the Guysborough Memorial Hospital Auxiliary. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Thomas Hamilton Canoe Run has been held on the Stewiacke River between Middle Stewiacke and Birch Hill each July since the death on active service in Afghanistan on December 13, 2008, of Thomas Hamilton of Burnside, Colchester County, and Upper Musquodoboit. And whereas a dance at the Burnside Community Hall is also held in conjunction with the canoe run, proceeds from both events going towards the community efforts associated with that hall. And whereas Corporal Thomas Hamilton was a proud member of the Royal Canadian Regiment based in CFB Gagetown, who at the time of his death was on his third tour of duty in Afghanistan, and who is remembered with love and honor by the broad circle of his family and friends. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly, in concert with the people of the Stewiacke and Musquodoboit Valleys, upholds in honor the memory of Thomas Hamilton and offers this resolution to the Burnside Community Hall as testament and witness to this truth. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 1st, 2011, 2 local sailors sailed into victory during the national championships held at the St. Margaret's Sailing Club in Glenhaven. Whereas Alexander Burke of the Hubbard Sailing Club won 2nd place and the laser competition. And whereas Daniel Dubé of the St. Margaret's Bay Sailing Club won 3rd place in the women's laser competition. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Alexander and Danielle and wishes them all the best in the future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the North End Community Garden began in North End, Halifax at Warrington Park in 2007 as an initiative of the North End Community Health Centre, community members and local agencies with a mission which includes engaging local youth and their families in building an environment where hope blooms. And whereas 2011 is the 2nd year of operation for the Hope Blooms salad dressing entrepreneurial project, and this year 32 youth grew and harvested herbs in the community garden, measured and mixed the ingredients for 3 flavors of salad dressing, and then packaged and labeled the bottles, all under the supervision of Jessie Jollymore, a dietitian at the North End Community Health Centre. And whereas Hope Blooms is a great success with over 2,000 bottles sold already and with proceeds going to a scholarship fund for the young participants and $1 per bottle going to a cause selected by the youth, which this year is a lunch program at Joseph Howe Elementary School. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate all the young people involved in the Hope Blooms program on their success as entrepreneurs, providing a healthy and delicious project, and thank the adults and agencies who generously contribute their time and resources, and wish everyone involved continued success in growing seasons yet to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Just Us Coffee Roasters, located in Grand Prairie, Nova Scotia, was the People's Choice winner of the Eat Atlantic Food Product of the Year contest, and whereas Just Us received the greatest number of votes among the top 10 finalists at Co-op's Eat Atlantic website, and whereas Just Us Coffee is an excellent example of a cooperative business that has found a way to combine a people-first approach with an excellent product. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Just Us Coffee Roasters for being chosen the People's Choice winner for the Eat Atlantic Food Product of the Year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lockport businessman Chris Bird was the recipient of the Green Award at the Shelburne County Business Development Corporation and the Shelburne and Area Chamber of Commerce 2011 Business Excellence Award on October the 20th, 2011, and whereas Chris Bird was the founder, his business Rehouse Timber Frames on green and sustainable principles and practices is dedicated to the minimum environment impact in his building projects through the reuse and recycling of materials. And whereas Chris Bird believes in the art of timber framing and is committed to environmentally responsible construction that is focused on salvaged, recyclable, and local building materials that provide sustainable building options. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Shelburne businessman Chris Bird for receiving the Green Award at the Business Excellence Award on October the 20th, 2011. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Donna Belanger and James Sheen, who were volunteers at the Hector Quay, home of the ship Hector in Pictou, chose to renew their wedding vows on the ship Hector to commemorate their 10th wedding anniversary. And whereas Donna and James chose the ship Hector for their renewal ceremony, and they elected to renew their wedding vows dressed in period clothing from 1773. And whereas the renewal ceremony was officiated by Justice of the Peace Kevin McPherson, who was also dressed in period clothing of 1773 and is also a Hector Quay volunteer. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly congratulates Donna Belanger and James Sheen for renewing their wedding vows at the Hector Quay, home of the ship Hector in Pictou, and wishes them many years of happiness together. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Thank you. In the House. Lures in the House. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas David Wilson, owner and chairman of both Ski Wentworth and Crab Mountain, founder and chairman of Kerr Controls, and co-chairman of Wilson Fuel, has dedicated many years to helping organizations within the community, such as the Scouting Movement, where he served as Scoutmaster for 16 years, and is also a member of the Nova Scotia Business Hall of Fame. And whereas Dave Wilson has served on many boards and was involved in developing sports organizations such as the Truro Bearcat rugby team in the 1950s and the Truro Spartans Gymnastics Club in the 1970s, and is credited with organizing the first ski instructor course in Nova Scotia. And whereas David Wilson has received the prestigious 2011 Humanitarian Award for Nova Scotia due to his long-standing practice of giving back to his community, therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates David Wilson for being the recipient of the 2011 Humanitarian Award and wishes him all the very best in his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're in a good mood in the House today. I would like to do this, please, on behalf of the MLA for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Discovery Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organization that stimulates interest in science and technology by providing innovative and entertaining hands-on experiences for all ages. And whereas the Discovery Awards for Science and Technology are presented annually to honor outstanding individuals whose internationally recognized work is being carried out right here in Nova Scotia. And whereas on November 17, 2011, the 9th Annual Discovery Awards for Science and Technology will recognize nominees in 4 categories, including Dalhousie University's Jason Brown, Kevin Hewitt and Simon Sherry, and Jill Chorney of Dalhousie University and the IWK Health Centre. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the Discovery Centre for its commitment to making science and technology accessible to all Nova Scotians and extends congratulations to Jason Brown, Kevin Hewitt, Simon Sherry, Jill Chorney, and all of the 2011 award nominees. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my colleague, the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Eastern Passage resident Walter Miller has been involved with volunteer committee work through the Lions Club over the past 2 decades, and whereas in the spring of 2011, Walter Miller received his 20-year Monarch Certificate of Service from the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Lions Club at the 39th Chapter Night. And whereas the extent of Walter's volunteerism includes remaining active on committees such as Bingo, Dog Guide Walk, and the Carnival. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly commends Walter Miller for being awarded his 20-year Monarch Certificate of Service from the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Lions Club. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas design innovations can enable Nova Scotian products to be shipped all over the world, and whereas Roger Mann, lead designer at J&H Industries in Liverpool, took on the challenge of designing roof trusses to fit in cargo containers, and whereas Roger Mann's innovative design has enabled J&H Industries to enter the international market, sending roof trusses to Greenland. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates Roger Mann and J&H Industries for their pioneering design of roof trusses for the international market. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Plymouth Community Centre, Efficiency Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotia Power held a Christmas tree lighting ceremony November the 18th, attended by over 200 people, and whereas the Dr. W.A. McLeod Elementary School Choir, consisting of 35 children, performed under the direction of Dwayne Laffin, and whereas the 3rd annual outdoor tree lighting ceremony further underlines the awarding by the Lieutenant Governor to the Greater East River Valley community this year's Community Spirit Award. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate the Plymouth Community Centre and applaud the children of the Dr. W.A. McLeod School Choir for an evening ceremony that helps create a stronger sense of community throughout the East River Valley. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Glen Arbor Ratepayers Association, a neighbourhood of Hammonds Plains, constructed a brand new playground facility in the fall of 2011. And whereas this playground is a facility of nearly $90,000 in value, and whereas the playground allows residents to enjoy the outdoors in their own neighborhood and provides a space for children and families to be physically active. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating the families of Glen Arbor on their new playground facility, which will provide a good location for families to gather together and engage in active lifestyles. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Victorian Order of Nurses, or VON, began in Kentville in 1926 and this year celebrates 85 years, and whereas prenatal education, well baby clinics, and school health services are some of the programs that had their earliest origins with the VON, while more recent initiatives include home-based palliative care, adult day programs, foot care clinics, respite care, and Meals on Wheels. And whereas VON Annapolis Valley delivers its programs and services through 2 local offices staffed by 225 healthcare workers and 170 dedicated community volunteers. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulates the Victorian Order of Nurses on 85 years in Kentville, on identifying emerging health and social needs, and for providing innovative services that meet the needs of citizens throughout the community. Mr. Speaker, I will request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you. On behalf of the member for Guysborough Sheet Harbour, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 15th, 2011, Sheet Harbour Consolidated School took part in the 25th anniversary Rick Hansen Relay Tour. And whereas Hannah Glosson and Noah Hawes were honorary medal bearers and received souvenir medals and special event outfits for participating, and whereas the students were able to meet Rick Hansen personally at Cole Harbour Place while attending the evening's closing ceremonies, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Hannah Glosson and Noah Hawes for participating in the 25th anniversary Rick Hansen Relay. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The time has now arrived for oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 3:07, and we will finish at 4:37. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Over a year ago, CBC reported that there were too many nursing home beds empty. In fact, at the time it was reported that at any given time, there were about 100 empty beds and that initiatives were underway to increase the occupancy rates. Last evening, a report was released by CBC highlighting the facts that wait lists for long-term care facilities continue to grow. Mr. Speaker, there appears to be a supply and demand disconnect that continues to widen under this NDP government, and it's the seniors in this province, whether they are waiting in hospital or in community, who are the victims of government's inaction. So my question to the Premier, given that wait lists continue to grow, could the Premier please explain why initiatives to address the number of empty beds have apparently failed?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is not the case. In fact, over the last 2 2 years. We have either constructed or have under construction more than 1,000 long-term care beds. We have worked with the long-term care facility operators to smooth the transition from what is a single entry access list through into the beds that are actually serving those communities. And the Leader of the Opposition is right. There is often a delay between the identification of the person at the top of the list and their acceptance of a bed in a particular facility. And this has created situations where, if you add up the number of days, they amount to a substantial amount of unused bed time in these long-term care facilities. And the minister, as part of the continuing care strategy, has been working with the operators to try and minimize that loss of bed usage.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's what we thought was happening over a year ago, and what we were looking for was some answers from the government on what initiatives they put in place for the last year to reduce that delay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all know in this House that seniors don't want to be in a nursing home. However, in the absence of any other substantive programs available, it becomes the only option available for families. For seniors waiting in communities for a nursing home bed, the wait time has increased by 36% in the last year, Mr. Speaker, alone. What does this government do in response, Mr. Speaker? The very opposite of what they should be doing to support families and seniors. They slash respite beds. So my question to the Premier, since the government is aware of the contents of this report and the pressures it is placing on families, could the Premier give us some indication how many nursing home beds are empty right now?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition would know, the numbers with respect to bed vacancies and indeed the number of people who are in community on any one day or in a particular hospital any one day change because people are admitted or are transferred to facilities on a regular basis. But with respect to respite care, this is an important matter, of course, for communities. I would ask the Minister of Health to provide the Leader of the Opposition with some information on this.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in fact, what the Department of Health has done is converted respite beds into long-term care beds. Mr. Speaker, we had many respite beds throughout the province, some that were occupied as little as 6% annually, sitting there. We were paying for them, Mr. Speaker. They weren't being used. They're now being used, and they're being used to take seniors off the waiting list so that they can have a long-term care bed, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
The purpose of a respite bed, Mr. Speaker, was to give caregivers at home a break with their loved one, Mr. Speaker. Everyone in the province, if they actually understand what a respite bed is, would recognize they would not be full occupancy in a respite bed, Mr. Speaker. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, as they've taken a number of respite beds off the list, not only have they put more pressure on caregivers at home, Mr. Speaker, but wait lists for accessing long-term care is growing under the government, Mr. Speaker. We know that wait times for seniors, Mr. Speaker, in the community for nursing homes beds has increased by 36%. We also know that one key support being provided to these families was respite beds, which government slashed from 77, Mr. Speaker, to 33. One only has to wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether there's a correlation between wait times and the slashing of these respite beds. My question to the Premier, what new home care programs has the government put in place in the last year to provide support for seniors and their families so that they can be kept off of the wait lists in the first place?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you have a circumstance where for 94% of the time the bed is empty, surely even the Leader of the Opposition can understand that that bed is better used by actually having a senior in it and being provided with the care that they need. What the department is addressing, of course, and really what the most recent report underlines is the necessity for the long-term care, continuing care model to change. And in fact, we shouldn't be waiting until people get on the list for a long-term care facility. We should be providing them with support so that they can stay in home. We should be providing them with assisted living options. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what the Department of Health is doing.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard the Premier say a few moments ago that, I quote, "we built 1,100 long-term care beds." I can't help but ask who exactly he means by we, because the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, those beds were approved and funded 4 years ago in 2007. Yesterday, the CBC reported on the realities that Nova Scotians face today when it comes to long-term care. And the fact of the matter is, today there are 1,700 seniors in this province, like Shirley Dykins, whose two sisters, Nancy and Jean, are forced to care for her as she waits to get into a long-term care facility. Mr. Speaker, like the PC caucus has been saying all along, the CBC confirmed yesterday that the NDP government cancelled the program that was creating long-term care beds for people like Shirley. When I asked the Premier about this yesterday, he said, "we did no such thing." And so my question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is why won't he just admit that he cancelled the 1,320 long-term bed strategy, 200 beds short of its intended target?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not true. The leader of the Conservative Party knows it's not true, and he knows that the strategy that was put in place by the previous government went out to 2016, not out to 2011. So, in fact, the majority of that has been completed already, and what we are doing, instead of waiting to get out to the 2016 date, is we're actually looking at the kinds of supports, the kinds of programming that we can put in place in community to help people be able, seniors being able to stay in their homes longer, so that we are reducing the wait list by reducing the necessity for that being its only option, Mr. Speaker. And that is the important piece that seniors in this province and those organizations who represent them are asking for.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
The wait list to go into long-term care is going up. It is not being reduced. It is going up. The fact of the matter is that 4 years ago, a plan was approved and funded to build 1,320 long-term care beds for that very reason. The Premier likes to take credit for the 1,100 that were built under that plan, but he won't even admit the truth that they canceled the remaining 200, and wait lists are going up further because of it. In fact, it has been reported by CBC that wait lists have grown 35.5% up to April of 2010. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Premier is a simple one. Since he won't admit the obvious, that they canceled the 200 beds remaining of the 1,300, why is he turning his back on people like Shirley Dykins, Nancy Davis, Jean Reynolds, and the 1,700 others that don't qualify to age in place and do qualify and do need long-term care?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, we are in a position now where we have some 7,600 long-term care beds right across the province, providing service to seniors through many communities in every part of the province. Is demand continuing to grow? Of course it is. We have an aging population, and we recognize that. The organizations who represent seniors and those who are advancing the interests of those people who need this kind of help have said that there has to be a comprehensive strategy to assist people at each stage of the aging process. And we have been engaged with those organizations, designing programs, putting in place supports, and we recognize that there will be a need for additional long-term care beds over time. And in fact, we're in the process of doing some construction of those now. But the simple fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that what is needed is a comprehensive strategy.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Health's own report indicates that there are 3,230 people in Nova Scotia who have been added to the wait list for long-term care in 2010. 37% of those people were already in a hospital, Mr. Speaker, waiting for a long-term care bed. 36% of that group lived in a community where there was no public home care funding, Mr. Speaker, meaning that 3/4 of that group, 2,300 people, need a long-term care bed to get the care that they need. And yet the Premier says we need a strategy, but there's no strategy. Since 3/4 of people who are waiting do not qualify for aging in place or at-home care, Mr. Speaker, and that the only option for them is a long-term care bed, my question to the Premier is this. His government knows that they canceled those 200 final beds under the strategy. Why doesn't he just admit it and tell us what their plan is to help those 2,388 people who have no plan from his government?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I'll just reiterate what the Leader of the Conservative Party says is untrue. In 2009, 2010, Mr. Speaker, we put in place, built some 338 long-term care beds in 10-11. We put in place or built another 450 beds. So far this year, just in this fiscal year, we have built another 114 beds, Mr. Speaker. But I think it's important that people understand what it is that the seniors organizations are actually asking for. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm going to do is table a letter on behalf of the president of the Group of Nine, Mr. Bill Van Gorder, in which he says, we are really urging the province to spend more effort helping seniors age in place and support them in staying in their own homes or family homes instead of being institutionalized, Mr. Speaker. And we are, in fact, doing exactly what seniors are asking us to do.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in an answer to a reporter's question, the Premier said that there was no job crisis in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Stats Canada data shows that over the past year, 6,600 people have lost work outside of Halifax, while 9,800, Mr. Speaker, have given up and exited the workforce. Mr. Speaker, 9,800 people losing hope. That is equivalent to the entire town of Bridgewater, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Premier, why is the Premier ignoring the crisis in rural Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, this is the government that has brought 3,000 new jobs to Nova Scotia over the last 2 years since we were elected. Mr. Speaker, this is the government that has made investments in Shelburne, in Yarmouth County, in Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, we have made investments right across the province of Nova Scotia, in Amherst, in Colchester, Mr. Speaker. That's where we're investing our money to help businesses in rural Nova Scotia create good jobs so that people can live there and raise their families there.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is the government that has lost 12,500 jobs since they've taken us in June 9, Mr. Speaker, in this year alone, they've lost 6,600 jobs in rural Nova Scotia under this Premier's watch, Mr. Speaker. The Premier seems to take job losses lightly. We have a clear crisis outside of Halifax, and yet day after day he stands in this House blaming others, instead of insisting on real action that will make a difference, Mr. Speaker, for those Nova Scotians. Things like completely overhauling the tax structure to make our province more competitive. In the process, ensuring that all Nova Scotians have the opportunity to get back to work in the communities in which they live. Mr. Speaker, 6,600 jobs lost outside of Halifax in the last year is more than the entire population of Greenwood, and it is more than the entire population of Lunenburg. My question to the Premier, will the Premier stop ignoring rural Nova Scotia and provide a clear economic strategy to put people back to work?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there is a clear economic strategy. It's laid out in the Jobs Here program, which was endorsed thoroughly by chambers of commerce, by business people from one end of the province to the other, Mr. Speaker. It invests in competitiveness, in innovation, Mr. Speaker, in small businesses, in medium-sized businesses, in manufacturing sector, right across the province, from Yarmouth right through to Sydney.
Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
That's the plan they call jobs somewhere else, Mr. Speaker. The very organizations that the Premier talks about and boasts about supporting his government are the very people who are standing outside complaining about first contract arbitration. He's ignoring them then, Mr. Speaker, and he's ignoring the fact that 12,500 people have lost their jobs under his government, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has hiked the HST by 2%. This Premier increased over 1,400 user fees outside the legislature. The Premier has stood by while food, gas and power has gotten more and more expensive. And as this Premier has imposed the NDP electricity tax on every power bill in this province. Mr. Speaker, instead of making our businesses more competitive, the Premier has made it harder to do business in Nova Scotia. And that means, Mr. Speaker, it's harder to get a good job in this province. 6,600 people out of work in rural Nova Scotia in the last year alone. Almost 10,000 people, Mr. Speaker, are so disenfranchised with the situation that they have left the workforce. My question to the Premier, just how many people have to lose their job and leave the workforce before you consider a crisis?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Leader of the Opposition is confused. He's just recited all the things that happened the last time the Liberals were in power, Mr. Speaker. It is this government that took the HST off of home energy, off of children's clothing. It is this government that eliminated income tax for seniors on GIS. It is this government that signed the Lower Churchill Agreement with Newfoundland and Labrador. It is this government that assisted with the largest single industrial contract in history, Mr. Speaker. That's a record of success.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives released a report today indicating for the first time since 2003, progress on child poverty has stalled. In fact, the child poverty rate increased. 14,000 children in Nova Scotia living in poverty. Mr. Speaker, power rates are high and climbing, the cost of fuel is exorbitant, and Nova Scotians pay the highest taxes in the country. 12,500 jobs have disappeared since this government took office, and it's getting harder for families to make ends meet, and children are suffering for it. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Will this minister stand up for children in Nova Scotia and pressure her government to address the affordability issues that are keeping families in poverty?
And the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I'm very proud to be in a government that has supported families in poverty and low-income individuals through a $100 million investment. And I think it's very interesting to note that the opposition member must realize that that report only went to 2009 and does not include the last 2 years of $100 million investment from the province of Nova Scotia and this NDP government, which has made a difference.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I am aware that this report covers 2009, which this government was in office for 6 months. Since taking office, this government has made life more expensive for families. They've hiked the HST. They added a tax on home heating. They raised 1,400 user fees. And to add insult to injury, this government slashed the heating assistant rebate program from $450 to $200. So we should not be surprised that child poverty levels here in Nova Scotia are not good. Mr. Speaker, what will the minister do to end child poverty?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This minister and this government has been working diligently for 2.5 years to move toward ending poverty for children. And in fact, it's very surprising when some of the things that, we have done in terms of increasing the IA personal allowance by $15, increasing the child tax benefit by 22%. We increased foster care rates for the first time in decades. We did it 2 years in a row. We added 250 more spaces to child care subsidies. We doubled the flat rate income exemption for persons with disabilities to $300. We refund on the provincial income tax to seniors. All those things helping family and children. There's a long list. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? When we had a vote in the spring budget, they voted against each and every one of those.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister must be aware that the NDP electricity tax ate up that $15 awfully quickly. Mr. Speaker, children living in poverty cannot wait. We know that children living in poverty do not have the same educational outcomes as kids in higher income families. Children in poverty do not enjoy the same level of health as children in higher income families. Children in poverty simply do not have the same opportunities to succeed. Mr. Speaker, this government is giving nickels and dimes to poor families and then turning around and penalizing them because now their income is above qualifying levels for programs. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit today to removing the child tax credit from income assessments for people applying for government assistance programs if, in fact, they actually do care and are more concerned about poor people than what was done in the past?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Boy, Mr. Speaker, it's amazing that anybody can stand in this House and say those types of things with a $100 million investment. We never saw it from that party when they were in government. We never saw it from the other party. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, the same people that have done the report that the honourable member is referencing said this about this NDP government. The current NDP government is to be commended for implementing initiatives targeted at families living in low income in Nova Scotia. The creation of more subsidized child care spaces was one of the outcomes of the Nova Scotia Poverty Reduction Strategy that was introduced in 2009, and I can read on, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of jobs somewhere else, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is surely aware that McKesson, Canada's largest pharmaceutical distributor, announced a few days ago that they are closing up shop in Nova Scotia. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I have the letter that McKesson sent to all of their customers, and I will quote from it and then table it for the benefit of all present. The letter says, "Dear customer, changes to market conditions and regulatory requirements have forced us to reevaluate our distribution network in Atlantic Canada. The fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that they are reevaluating their distribution network in Atlantic Canada in that they are moving it from Nova Scotia to Moncton, New Brunswick, because of regulatory requirements, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, given that the jobs are being lost here and going to New Brunswick, will he at least take responsibility for the evidence here presented that his government's regulatory policies are driving jobs away?"
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the leader of the Conservative Party knows, Nova Scotia has the lowest unemployment rate in Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, it has been this government that has shepherded 3,000 more jobs into this province over the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, it is this government that is looking to the future with projects like the Lower Churchill and with the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're doing here. We are creating the right environment to foster economic growth.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, they're creating the right environment to foster job and economic growth in Moncton, New Brunswick. Fact of the matter is 45 jobs are leaving Nova Scotia and they are going to Moncton because of the regulatory environment that exists in Nova Scotia. This is not something that can be blamed on the global economic difficulties. This is something this government has done to us, Mr. Speaker. So since the Premier won't admit that his own decisions now have cost Nova Scotia 45 jobs and give them to New Brunswick, will at least he admit that his decisions, his regulatory environment, his government is behind the loss of these 45 jobs which are on their way to New Brunswick?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the economic framework, the jobs here strategy, the investments in competitiveness and innovation mean that every single day, Mr. Speaker, companies are making the decision to come to Nova Scotia to set up and to build their future here, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I just tabled the evidence that every single day companies in Nova Scotia are considering moving to New Brunswick, and this is just the latest example. And I might add, this is before the most recent regulatory change, legislative change that government wants to make around first contract arbitration. The train is just starting, Mr. Speaker, because of the decisions of this Premier and this government. So I will ask the Premier, given that this is the latest example of decisions that his government is making that is costing Nova Scotia jobs, will he at least stop the current Labour agenda before more jobs are lost?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Conservative Party that would know that all the jurisdictions that have first contract legislation have stronger GDP growth than Nova Scotia has, Mr. Speaker. They would also notice, Mr. Speaker, that GDP growth in this province is stronger than the GDP growth in New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, since this government decided to cancel the international ferry link from Yarmouth to New England, the entire region of southwestern Nova Scotia has been suffering. Not only has this government killed one of the largest economic drivers of southwest Nova, their lack of a real economic strategy with targets and measurable goals has made the region suffer even more. In the last year, employment in southwestern Nova Scotia dropped by 2,500 jobs. My question to the Premier is, why has he allowed 2,500 jobs to be lost in southwestern Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out to the member opposite, in fact, the number of jobs in the province of Nova Scotia has gone up by some 3,000 over the last couple of years. There are, in fact, differences from county to county, and that has been the historic nature of the job market in this province. But I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, you know, when we're investing in the Shelburne shipyards, when we're investing in AF Terrio, when we're investing in Allendale Electronics, we're doing that on the South Shore. We're doing that in Southwest Nova in order to be able to create more jobs for those communities.
The Honourable Member for Yarmouth on his first supplementary.
I'm not sure how much evidence members of this caucus need to present before the Premier realizes that jobs are being lost in this province, not gained. The facts are there. The facts are there in StatsCan. The facts are there in your own department statistics. Get with it. Jobs are going elsewhere. The 2,500 jobs lost over the last year, and that doesn't even account for White Point or the uncertainty with Bowater. Because of this government's neglect, there were 4,300 people who left the workforce last year in the southern region alone. 4,300 people who view the situation that the NDP have created so dire that they have left because they have no other options in this province. So will the Premier finally listen to the facts, pay attention to the job losses, and do something to help those people that are losing jobs every day in this province?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What Statistics Canada says is that from June 2009 to June 2011, the number of jobs in this province went up by 3,000. Mr. Speaker, that's a fact. I'd be happy to give him the Statistics Canada reference if he needs them. But the simple fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in this province, there is a detailed economic plan that focuses on innovation, on competitiveness, in investments in companies who have asked us to help them in very specific ways. Mr. Speaker, we are responding to those requests. Mr. Speaker, we are growing the economy. We are creating good jobs.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Premier is going to continue to ignore the numbers, but what he can't ignore is the voices of those Nova Scotians losing jobs daily under his watch. If he gets tired of listening to the numbers here in the House, he can come to my community in Yarmouth and talk to businesses that have closed. He can go to Cape Breton and talk to people that are out of work. He can go everywhere else in this province and talk to people that aren't working because he has done nothing to make this province more competitive or appealing to business. Nothing. Mr. Speaker, why, with this job crisis facing our province, hasn't this Premier brought in one piece of legislation to deal with the fundamental issues affecting the economy of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the simple fact of the matter is this: we have created 3,000 more jobs in the first 2 years of our mandate. And, Mr. Speaker, it is this government that has brought in the most competitive business tax environment in 20 years.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be to the minister responsible for seniors. Yesterday, when asked about times for long-term care, the Premier said, "We all know we have an aging population. We all know that there are growing requirements for models of care that are going to assist people right through the aging process. That means providing the appropriate number of long-term care beds." But yesterday we learned that the demand for long-term care beds is outstripping the supply, despite adding extra capacity, according to what the Department of Health has said. As a result, people who need nursing home care are waiting for the care they require. In fact, for clients of the Cape Breton District Health Authority, the wait for a long-term care bed averages more than 400 days, Mr. Speaker, 400 days, according to their own report. Will the minister responsible for seniors correct what the Premier said yesterday and admit that this government is not providing the appropriate number of long-term care beds for seniors who need them?
The honourable minister responsible for seniors.
Mr. Speaker, the long-term care beds are under the responsibility of the Minister of Health, so I'll pass that question along to her.
The honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing more important than the care of seniors in our healthcare system. To myself as Minister of Health, my department, and to this government and the Premier. Mr. Speaker, we have consistently opened new long-term care beds. We're halfway through the continuing care strategy. There are more beds to be built. There are more beds that we are doing planning for, Mr. Speaker. And it's not accurate that there's been a cancellation of long-term care beds, Mr. Speaker. Beds continue to be added into the system. But, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the provision of long-term care beds, we are also adding other supports and other services into our continuing care program. We have added a supportive care program for seniors, Mr. Speaker, who to keep them in their own homes. They're able to get up to $500 a month, Mr. Speaker, to assist them with respite, with homemaker duties, with snow removal. Mr. Speaker, there are many, many things that we are doing to support seniors in their homes, as well as go into a nursing home environment if that's what they require, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in her own accountability report, and I will table that, the minister responsible for seniors identifies a goal of the strategy for positive aging as being, and I quote, "to enable seniors to live in safe and supportive living environments free from danger, fear, and exploitation," end of quote. Yesterday, we heard sisters Nancy Davis and Jean Reynolds say caring for their sister Shirley while she waits for placement in a long-term care facility has destroyed the quality of life for all three of them and has left them very fearful. Will the minister admit that this government is failing to meet this goal, that the thousands of seniors feel fearful and unsupported because this government is not providing the appropriate number of long-term care beds?
The honourable minister responsible for seniors.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, with respect to seniors, they're very, very important to us, and this is a government that has been doing planning and strategy surrounding many elements of keeping seniors home longer. And in terms of the long-term care beds, once again, I will ask my colleague, the Minister of Health, to answer that portion. Yes, what do you have?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, being a caregiver for an elderly parent or sibling is a very stressful situation, and all of the research points to that, Mr. Speaker. And if you know caregivers, if you've been one yourself, you know this. And Mr. Speaker, that's why this government has introduced 3 programs to assist seniors be in their own homes and get support. We've introduced a caregiver's benefit, Mr. Speaker. We've introduced the supportive care program, Mr. Speaker, and we've introduced the personal alert system for seniors who are in danger of falling because they've already fallen, Mr. Speaker. And I would highly recommend that people who are caring for an elderly parent or relative or friend contact the continuing care department and get information about the variety of programs that are available to support them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I must say that I'm disappointed that the minister responsible for seniors isn't confident enough in the report that she's released and the information that was supplied to her from her department to answer her own question. As I mentioned, clients of the Cape Breton District Health Authority, Mr. Speaker, wait for long-term care beds for more than 400 days. That's over 13 months, Mr. Speaker. By any standard, that is unacceptable. What is the Minister of Health doing to shorten the wait lists in Cape Breton and ease in the burden on hundreds of Cape Breton families?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, indeed, the wait times in Cape Breton are longer than elsewhere. But, Mr. Speaker, members of the House should also realize that we have more long-term care beds in Cape Breton per the population of seniors than any other DHA, with the exception of Colchester, Mr. Speaker. And for seniors in Cape Breton, they indeed are as eligible for all of the range of programs that we have to support them as any other part of the province. So I would indeed urge people to be in contact with the District Health Authority, with the care coordinators, get information. Mr. Speaker, there are many people who are waiting for long-term care who are not receiving any other services, and they could very well be eligible for those services, and they should avail themselves of those services, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. On October 12th, the Minister announced a properly regulated methadone program for the Annapolis Valley. And while the news was initially welcomed, its success was short-lived. The program, now only 6 weeks old, has a wait list, and those on the list can only receive an assessment, no treatment. My question to the Minister, is this not indicative of a problem much larger than the Minister was willing to admit?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the program that is being introduced into the Annapolis Valley will not only set a very high standard for treatment programs, methadone treatment programs in Nova Scotia, but Mr. Speaker, it will be a program that will set an extraordinarily high standard for these programs across the country. The Annapolis Valley District Health Authority, who are implementing this program, are working through what is required very carefully, because they care about the quality of the service that they're offering people. They're in the process of using the resources we've provided them to get additional staff in place. They need also to find family physicians to participate in this program, and they're also working to identify additional clinic sites, Mr. Speaker. So the program is unfolding, indeed, absolutely as it should, Mr. Speaker. Anybody who would have thought that there would be instant results within hours of having an announcement of additional resources, Mr. Speaker, are very naive about how long it takes to put personnel in place to address these serious, serious issues, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Minister well knows, we're now closing in on 1 year since this issue came to the forefront. Mr. Speaker, people who need methadone in the Valley are now once again forced to wait. As of today, we have had 53 people attempting to seek help. 22 are receiving treatment, while 31 people are left in limbo. Any new cases will receive an assessment only, with the holdup being an issue of insufficient staff resources. Who knows how long it will take to ensure adequate staff resources and how many we will lose as they slip back into the vicious cycle. My question to the Minister, what will happen to those individuals currently on the wait list who are willing to seek treatment now?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are existing programs in the Valley with respect to detoxification. There are ongoing support and counseling programs for people, Mr. Speaker. I listened with interest this morning to the interview with the Director of Addiction Services, and he indicated that people who are on the wait list are encouraged to maintain regular contact with the addiction counseling professionals in the Valley who will support them through the process until they have the range of clinics and personnel in place, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, families of those on the wait lists are looking for support. This is an issue that this government was reluctant to address in the beginning, is now making an effort to address, but once again, we find ourselves stalled in the process. Madam Minister, I spoke to Stephen George just a few minutes ago, and he will have to wait 3 weeks to whenever, is what he was told. Plus, the website says he could get detoxed in 1 to 3 days. It took him 30 days. So my question to the Minister, how long will those on the wait list for methadone in the Valley have to wait?
Honourable the Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, we have provided the resources to the District Health Authority, and they are developing this program. They need to recruit personnel. They need to put a number of things in place before the program is fully subscribed, Mr. Speaker. But they have already begun to bring people into that program. They have done that in a way where they have determined the people who require the services most to begin the program, which is a kind of triaging process that is common in our healthcare system. And Mr. Speaker, I have very high confidence in the healthcare providers in the Annapolis Valley to be able to have a methadone treatment program that other parts of the province will learn from, and indeed other provinces in Canada will look to, because it is being developed with such high standards, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. We strongly agree with the Auditor General that protection of persons in care deals with a vulnerable sector of our society, and these individuals should have every opportunity to be protected from abuse. However, in the report last week, tabled by the Auditor General, it was revealed that there is a lack of an appeal process for a person who has been accused of such abuse. Would the Minister agree that an appeal process is a basic requirement of due process for people who have been founded of allegations of abuse?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member says, it is the Protection of Persons in Care Act. It has been a wonderful act in order to be able to protect those individuals that are in facilities throughout the province of Nova Scotia. And certainly one of the recommendations from the Auditor General was speaking about an appeal act. And what we're looking at, we're working through that process now because it's coming down to terminology, whether we're speaking about an actual appeal versus a review. So we have taken the advice of the Auditor General and we are looking at that now and going forward with his recommendations in some manner. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on page 50 of the report, it states that management at both the Departments of Community Services and Health and Wellness told the Auditor General that they do not believe an appeal process is necessary for this program. On what evidence does the Minister's Department base its gut feeling when they say they do not believe an appeal process is necessary?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, as I just mentioned, what we're looking at is in terms of an appeal process versus a review process. And we are looking at that. Presently, and the Auditor General commended our departments on having a good system, and the process now for the protection of persons in care is very good with how it's set up with our staff and how quickly they go in and they review the complaint. And so therefore we, as I said earlier, we as a Department of Community Services are looking at what that would be made of in terms of developing a review process versus an appeal process. So it's more set on what the terminology is and understanding of what that terminology would be. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on page 55 of that report, the Minister's Department said that it planned to research this topic and discuss available options. And my question would be, if the Department does not believe an appeals process is necessary, what outcomes does the Minister expect from the research? Or is this just a tactic to avoid the Auditor General's clear recommendation?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable member will see that over the past history since this government has been formed, that when the Auditor General has come forth with a recommendation in community services, that we have certainly followed his recommendations. And that's what we'll be doing this time again. We'll be looking at a review process and what that means. And that takes some discussion and understanding of how we're going to formulate that and how we'll exactly implement that. And that's exactly what we'll be doing.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a couple of weeks ago, I asked for an update from the Minister of Health and Wellness on progress around the implementation of recommendations of the Prescription Drug Working Committee. While the Minister spoke of an advertising campaign, which, while a good first step, its effectiveness remains to be seen, but also ignored were 4 recommendations that can be implemented within current financial resources. My question to the Minister, can the Minister please provide the status on the implementation of those recommendations the committee indicated could be done within existing resources?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I first of all would say that the working group provided, I think, very useful suggestions and recommendations to the department. Department staff are now working through those recommendations with respect to timely implementation, Mr. Speaker.
For Kings West.
Professionals who treat and support individuals with challenging addictions will tell you they need an array of services and interventions to ensure individuals make a complete recovery. I hear from families with young people frequently who say, my son, my daughter seek support for withdrawal. Some start a methadone program, others are told to seek counseling, and then they go back to their old habits only to repeat this process again and again and again. It's wasteful fiscally, but most importantly, it's not healthy, takes its toll on those who are addicted and their families. My question to the Minister, has there been any direction given by the Minister around requesting feedback from the Working Committee around whether we as a province have a full array of services available when it comes to treatment?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the recommendations of the Working Committee, I have met with members of my staff. We have reviewed the recommendations. They have been tasked with the responsibility for developing a plan to implement recommendations and various options for the Minister. And Mr. Speaker, I look forward to seeing recommendations from that Working Committee implemented. There are certain things that we have been able to do, such as the provision of resources to the Annapolis Valley District Health Authority for a methadone program, which we've already discussed. We've done some of the public education that I had spoken of before, Mr. Speaker. We also have made some adjustments in the prescription drug monitoring program that will enhance the information that's available through the prescription drug monitoring. So there are a number of initiatives, Mr. Speaker, that are underway, and we will continue to improve services for people with addictions with a view to doing a number of things. We need to do prevention, we need to do treatment, and we need to do enforcement as well. And as the Speaker knows, law enforcement and those issues fall outside the purview of the Minister of Health.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, many experts in the field speak to the need of a residential treatment facility for young people to ensure that recovery is complete and we minimize as much as possible the chances for relapse, an area the Minister can make a difference in. Could the Minister please indicate whether there's been any discussion around ensuring young Nova Scotians have access to a residential treatment program?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the work of the working group, the member may recall that I also referred the recommendations from the working group to the group that is working on a mental health and addiction strategy. And Mr. Speaker, when that strategy is completed, I will look to see what they are recommending with respect to treatment services and what the best practices are, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, in recent months there have been some conflicting statements on the necessity for breast cancer screening. In an attempt to sort out some of these conflicting statements, guidelines presented earlier this week by the Canadian Task Force on Preventative Health Care simply added to the confusion. Take, for example, women aged 40 to 49 who have no elevated risk of breast cancer. The guidelines state that these women should not have routine mammograms, and the guidelines further advise against the need for self-exams at any age. Now, as the Minister of Health and Wellness is no doubt aware, Nova Scotia is one of the provinces that encourages regular breast screening for women aged 40 to 49. So given this fact, could the Minister please indicate to this House whether the government intends to eliminate routine breast screening in women aged 40 to 49 as per the task force recommendation?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of breast screening is a very important issue to all members of this House, and I was very pleased as Minister of Health when one of the first things we were able to do was to invest in new digital mammography equipment for the Nova Scotia breast screening program all across the province, bringing Nova Scotia up to a very high standard, Mr. Speaker. In the province of Nova Scotia,